Well, good evening, IFL Nation, and welcome to tonight's video. This video is going to be in place of the usual live stream this week. I've just had a little bit of a stressful time with time constraints and all that good stuff going on, but in any event, I do want to deliver a complete product to the masses, so here I am, ready to discuss the final week of the Indoor Football League regular season. That is right. We have entered week 20. We've gone through 19 weeks. We've gone through 106 games. Just 6 more left to complete the slate and get us ready for the upcoming IFL postseason, which kicks off a week from Saturday. So, without further ado, let's hop right into it and discuss our plan of attack for the evening. We will have our usual weekly recap of the action that we had last time out. There were 5 games on the schedule, each one having their own allure, some history, pretty much everything that you would want as far as context within those games. So we will go through each one of those along with the results of our predictions to see how we did. And then we will factor all of those into the season-long trackers that we have up. They are, again, nearing completion, so we'll see how everything stands in terms of our results, the league's results, as well as some of those notable team trends that have firmly established themselves at this point in time. So after all of our reflection there, we're going to dive in, look at week 20. All but 2 teams will be in action, with the Rattlers and Chupacabras on bye. And the action's pretty well spread out this time around. We'll have 2 games tomorrow night on Friday, a pair of games on Saturday evening, and then a Sunday doubleheader, the classic 4 o'clock and 7:30 Eastern kicks on Yahoo Sports Network. As always, we will dive into each and every one of those games, figure out the players and the context and the trends of note, and then we'll put together our final parlay attempt of the regular season. And yeah, Arizona Rattlers games have not been kind to me on these. Fortunately, we won't have to worry about those looking ahead to this week. So let's jump right into Week 19 results. We started off with a vote of confidence in the Jacksonville Sharks, who returned home to take on the 1-13 Iowa Barnstormers in a game where Jacksonville, on a 4-game losing streak, had to really, I'd say, not just win this game, but set the tone overall on pretty much every phase of the game. They passed those flying colors, especially on the defensive front. Lining up against Aaron Aiken and the Iowa Barnstormer offense, there was only a singular touchdown in the first half allowed by that vaunted Jacksonville defense, as the Barnstormers' offensive struggles on the road really flared up in a very unfortunate way in this one for the faithful out in Des Moines. So as part of that effort, Jacksonville also nabbing a couple of interceptions, ended up turning the ball over on downs 4 times to give possession back to the Sharks. But yeah, offensively, they seem to find another gear, figuring out that they do have a hyper-talented running back on the roster in Jimmy Robinson. The Sharks made it a part of their game plan to get him the rock, and he delivers 5 touchdowns on the game, earning himself an Offensive Player of the Week nod. The end result of this one, Jacksonville snapping the skid, getting in the win column, 43-7, the final of that game. The 36-point margin of victory, well clear of what we needed with that Jacksonville minus 21.5 pick. So that got the week started. And then shortly after that game kicked off, we had another Eastern Conference tilt get underway. This one between the Quad City Steamwheelers and the Tulsa Oilers. And Tulsa, with this game, entering in on a win streak of 7 games, started out this one in a very similar script that they've started so many of their others. Absolutely hot start. Defensively, they get a couple early interceptions off Daquan Neal, both of them by Trey Harvey, who nearly had a third and maybe even a fourth interception on some plays later in the game that ended up getting overturned. But it was the perfect hot start from both sides of the ball that Tulsa needed. They led by as many as 17 points, but Quad City, even though they are mathematically eliminated, they did not back down. They slowly but surely trimmed into that advantage, taking advantage of some Tulsa mistakes and some miscues in the mid stages of the game. What was once a 17-point deficit at its worst ended up turning into a 1-point advantage in the fourth quarter for Quad City. The Oilers were able to get a touchdown plus a deuce on their ensuing possession, and Quad City, with a minute left, tying the game, Daquan Neal finding reliable veteran Kevin Rudd for a 6-yard touchdown pass. That made the game 41 apiece. Very much a game where the team possessing the ball last would have the best odds to win the game. And sure enough, the Oilers drove right down the field. They actually gave themselves up at the 1-yard line to bleed down the remainder of the clock, except for a couple of seconds. And then Axel Perez, who has been one of the better kickers in the league since joining Tulsa after being released from Orlando. Calm collected, boots through a 17-yarder as the buzzer sounds, giving Tulsa their 8th straight win to move to 10-5. This victory, 41-41, the final score over the Quad City Steamwheelers. So Jacksonville getting their win, Tulsa following suit, and that tussle between those two teams for the number 2 seed and home turf advantage will carry over into this week's festivities. Quad City, meanwhile, dropping down to double-digit losses for the first time in really quite a while. Maybe 2018 was the last time. But in any event, that was how that game panned out. We had one Western Conference tilt to wrap up the night. The New Mexico Chupacabras wrapping up their, I'll call it, inaugural season in its current form with a road game against the San Diego Strike Force. And entering this one, all San Diego had to do was win the game, and they would be the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. I do not have words to really describe how wild this game got, especially in the first half. After San Diego had paced itself out to an early 20-point lead, we had insane shenanigans happen throughout the second quarter. We had touchdowns defensively by both teams. In fact, 2 defensive touchdowns apiece before we even got into halftime. And we even had a field goal attempt by New Mexico blocked, where the ball ricochets through New Mexico's uprights. Absolutely absurd sequence, a arguably perfect, emblematic one-play summary of New Mexico's season to this point. But yeah, San Diego, they weren't messing around in this one. They got out to a 28-point halftime lead, putting themselves in a position where they got Kyle Kelly some meaningful snaps at quarterback. He ends up doing most of the legwork the rest of the way, eventually getting San Diego to the 70-point mark, which was more than good enough to cement their place at number 1 in the West. The road to Tucson will go through San Diego in that conference, thanks to the 70-30 Strike Force win over New Mexico, who finishes their 2026 season a very disappointing 2-14 record. With the damage having now been done, they can now look towards an eye to the 2027 season to see how they can rebound. So that was Saturday's action. Our pair of Sunday games led off with the matchup between the Arizona Rattlers and the San Antonio Gunslingers. Now, the context leading up to this game with San Diego's win the night before, Arizona knew they were already the number 3 seed. So that called into question maybe some potential roster decisions there. But San Antonio, regardless of what Arizona fielded, they needed to win this game to keep hope of a playoff berth alive. Arizona really heeded no warning to any of that at all. They start their full complement of players on both sides of the ball, including Max Myler at quarterback, and the Rattlers with some clutch plays in the second half, particularly an interception early in the quarter and a surprise onside kick recovered, which turned into another Arizona touchdown late. That gave the Rattlers a 36-20 lead at the half, and it really didn't get much better for the Gunslingers from that point onwards. Drew Powell taking the majority of the second half snaps at quarterback, remaining very, very efficient there, scoring on every possession except for one, and eventually got to a point where the deficit was far too much to overcome. San Antonio, to their credit, still played out the full 60 minutes. Arizona was very happy to oblige there. Um, so definitely some feels, I will say, um, in the final stretch of that game. But however that shakes out, it is a 64-42 win for the Arizona Rattlers to finish their season off on a high note. They will have the advantage of rest with a bye this week, leading into their matchup on August 2nd against the Vegas Nighthawks in Henderson to begin their playoff push. San Antonio, meanwhile, eliminated with a record of 4-11, looking to turn the page again to next spring. Northern Arizona and Tucson battled it out in an in-state rivalry to close out the week. The Wranglers get a Manny Higuera deuce to begin the game. They get a defensive stand and hold the Sugar Skulls scoreless on their first drive. That, unfortunately, was about as good as it got for Northern Arizona. Tucson's defense really answered the call in this game. Again, they didn't necessarily have to win this game to get into the playoffs, given San Antonio's loss, but just like Arizona did, they really did not care much about the context at all. They just went out, played their tails off, and the way that this game flowed absolutely showed that. The halftime score was 43-9 in favor of the Sugar Skulls. The Wranglers actually had to pivot to a change at quarterback after an injury knocked Anthony Garrett out of the contest. So Debo Bryant comes in, very admirably leads 5 touchdown drives all in the second half. Unfortunately, the Wranglers just couldn't really get a stop on defense. The first half really dug themselves too deep. And on a night absolutely dominated by the Sugar Skulls, they get the job done 70-42. They improve their record to 7-8, and even though the win would not have done it on its own, the Sugar Skulls clinched the postseason for the first time since 2023, whereas Northern Arizona's playoff drought now extends to 3 seasons. So that was the glimpse of the week that we had. We turned an uncertain slate into a 3-2 record, so consecutive winning weeks for the first time in basically 2 months in a season that has seen more than our fair share of struggles, especially on the over-under front. As you can see, we didn't really play any over-unders in our main picks last week. That was a little bit by design, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, our strength this year has leaned upon favorites, taking that spread and moneyline record and putting them together. Anytime that we've sided with the favorite in some way, shape, or form, we have won nearly 2/3 of the time. Perhaps unsurprising, given a trend that we will go into a little bit later tonight, within a matter of moments, really. But before we move on, notably, our plays of the week, the Mortal Mega Maxes, clinch a winning record for the regular season with Tucson's win. Our record there, 11-8, with 7 of our past 10 plays of the week resulting in winners. So a very, very big week 20 lies ahead. We could get a winning regular season record for the 4th time in as many seasons, or we could have the other side of history being written with some surprises possibly in store. So we will see what happens. Our parlay for week 19 was the 5th out of our past 6 attempts to go 2 out of 3. And that adds to an overall season where we have gone 2 out of 3 9 times. So that tantalizingly close to clinching our preseason goal of 4 parlay wins. Like I said before, each of our past 3 parlays have lost on legs involving the Arizona Rattlers. So not to pin the entirety of the blame on them, because their job is to play football, and my job is to predict, sometimes in favor or against certain teams. But in any event, won't have to worry about the Rattlers this week. They are on bye. So maybe that opens the door for us to make some other picks on other teams that we really haven't had the chance to highlight yet in the recent stretch here. So our form is there. All of that green shows. We can say that we're due all we want, but at the end of the day, we've got to string 3 green together, and I'm confident that we can do that with this week's attempt, which we will get to wrap up this video. Our results to date here are illustrated above. We continue our daunting descent back to net even territory. In theory, we could possibly get to net even with a perfect week at 6-0. But in all likelihood, we'd probably hover around the -2 to -4 unit mark if we do have a good week this week. So again, we do have a 7-game playoff slate to potentially capitalize and bring us back above. But at least for right now, in terms of profitability, this is going to be a relatively down season, which is okay. You play this game in the long term. The house does eventually win. We are seeing that statement ring somewhat true with the body of work that we've strung together this year. Alrighty, so here are our yearly results so far out of 106 games. One of the big themes of this season has been the dominance of favorites. A little bit surprising within the context of history that has largely favored the underdogs. So with this being a very, very chalky year compared to seasons past, especially with money lines on the favorite that have won nearly 74% of games, so basically 1 out of 4 underdogs have turned up upsets. We've seen a really interesting shift in odds for those wager types. Kind of favoring more the favorites, if that makes any sense. But in any event, favorites have been holding their own as well when it comes to the point handicap, outdoing underdogs by a record of 58-48. We have seen seasons where the underdog has covered anywhere between 55 and 59% of the time. So far this season, those results run in contrast to what previous years have indicated. Home teams remain a very, very strong bet across the board, having won in about 63% of games outright and covering the spread in about 65% of occasions. As far as the over-under front goes, it's been a very good season for the over-loving public, with 58 overs out of those 106 games. And with the league average right around that 86.9, 87.1 threshold. I think it was one of those two numbers when I last checked the math. We see a noticeable shift in conversion percentage, whether that number is 86.5 or 87.5. And at this juncture in the season, that is a 10% jump in chance if you're looking at 86.5 rather than 87.5. Again, this is obviously based on the full population of games. If you randomly select a team by matchup, those odds and percentages would certainly be influenced. But again, very dominant season for favorites, although home underdogs against the spread still remain a very strong bet overall. They've struggled a little bit in the past few weeks. I believe 1-3 in their last 4. But yeah, very fascinating season. A lot of these trends certainly have come to light. We've taken advantage of some of these throughout the season, although given our even 53-53 record, part of our reflection process for improving for the 2027 season is going to have to answer the question of how can we capitalize on this earlier, and how can we capitalize on it more frequently. So little food for thought with a bit of a forward-thinking type of philosophy, but there are your yearly results so far. Here are our team-by-team trends. The against the spread trend is very, very interesting in that we only have a handful of teams on multi-game streaks one way or the other. It's usually flip-flop between win and loss or vice versa. But make no mistake about it, the Arizona Rattlers will be entering the postseason as perhaps the most championship caliber team simply by performance versus expectations. They will ride a 4-game cover streak into their matchup in Henderson against the Nighthawks on August 2nd. Whereas the Chupacabras on the other side, they kind of limp to the finish, trying to navigate injuries and roster changes, coaching changes, all of that. And then San Diego, likewise, another very strong team on the spread, covering 10 out of 15 times this year, 3 of the last 4. They are actually on par with Green Bay and Orlando as the top covering teams in the IFL this season. Tulsa also not far behind at 9-6, whereas Iowa enters at the bottom of the standings in both straight-up record and against the spread. On our over-under front, we have Orlando and Tulsa as the top 2 teams, cashing the over 11 out of 15 times. San Diego again right there with a 10-5 over-under record. On the other side, you've got teams like Tucson and Iowa at 6-9, Quad City at 5-10, as a trio of more efficient under cashing teams. Our significant trends here. We mentioned Arizona taking a 4-game ATS win streak into the postseason. They are on bye this week, as are the Chupacabras. So we won't be able to potentially look at and act on either of those 2 spread streaks. But we do have some interesting over streaks to consider here. Namely, Tulsa's 8-game over streak, which I believe is 1 result shy of tying an all-time IFL betting era record for most games involving one team to make the over. Something for me to take a little bit of a look at and confirm later tonight as a mental note, but in any event, we do have 2 other teams red hot on the over-under front. We've got San Antonio cashing 5 straight and the Wranglers covering 3 straight. So could those be things that we look at when we get to the time where we discuss their games in particular? Entering the final week of the regular season, our 7-win per team preseason goal has been accomplished for 9 of the 14 teams in the league this season. We unfortunately had to say goodbye to the Tulsa Oilers in our bid for getting them to the finish line here, with our pick of minus 10.5 on their game coming up short, as the Oilers did win, but it took a game-winning field goal in order to have that happen. The defining teams for the remainder of our goal are San Diego and Fishers, who both have some pretty interesting games in their own rights heading into the weekend. Um, but even still, if we can get both wins on their games, that brings 11 of our 14 teams to our 7-win per team preseason mark, which honestly, it's not 13 out of 14 like last year, but it is fairly reasonable. Um, Unfortunately, we will not be able to get a New Mexico Chupacabra over-under correct this year. They are on bye, and we finish with an 0-4 record there. But some streaks that we could look towards Northern Arizona over-unders to see if we can finally get one of those to go, as well as Green Bay Moneyline, which we have somehow only picked twice and been on the wrong side of both times. So with their matchup against the Sharks, is there value on one side or the other there? Time will soon tell. Time for my weekly disclaimer section. This series is purely rooted in a guy's curiosity, entertainment, and a drive to grow the game of indoor football. We're going to be discussing a lot, or basically discussing all of these games, previewing the trends and players of note. There is going to be a predictive and gaming undertone to this, but that's mainly a byproduct of what our primary goal is here to begin with. If you are in a state that is legal and you are of legal age to try your luck, obviously you're more than welcome to do so, whether you tail or fade my selections that I present here. But know that these opinions are my own, and they are not meant to be construed as advice in any way, shape, or form. Again, if you do play, I strongly suggest having a budget already set in mind. That applies to both finances as well as time. Risk only what you can afford to lose. And if you feel like you're kind of devolving into a problem gaming sort of dynamic, have a game plan and responsible play are two great online resources that provide help with that matter. They're great tools, like I said, that help debunk myths, help answer any questions, provide clarity, and additional resources to provide support and assistance for those who need it. So, all of that being said, here's our final big board of the regular season. Let's hop in and discuss, starting with tomorrow night's game between the San Antonio Gunslingers and the Iowa Barnstormers, a non-conference clash between two teams that are currently out of the playoffs. And in San Antonio's case, it's been announced earlier this week that this will be the final game for Jonathan Bain as the team's head coach. So the 2027 coaching staff for the Gunslingers is probably going to look considerably different than the one that had struggled through the balance of this season. They come in as 10.5-point favorites in this game with the over-under at 72.5. If you like the money line, San Antonio's laying minus 375, whereas Iowa a plus 295 payout in the event that they pull off the upset in this finale. Looking at both teams, obviously it's been rough, but you have to make a case that San Antonio's overall team ceiling has been a lot more, or been a lot higher, rather. Offensively, they have seemed to figure it out, even though it was kind of too little too late. In the past month or so, they have made 40 points in 4 of their past 5 games after failing to make that mark in each of their first 10 games of the season. So, through a combination of Zach Calzada and Joaquin Collazo at quarterback, along with getting some of their star players along the skill positions healthy, they've been able to really bring the heat as the season has come to a close. And there's every reason to think that that will continue against an Iowa team that, by the numbers, have the most generous defense in the IFL, giving up about 52 points per game, and the least potent offensive attack in the IFL with an average of just 27 points per game. So the quarterback question in Des Moines is probably going to come down to Aaron Aiken or Noah Bodden again. I would have to suspect that the veteran Aiken is going to get his third straight start unless Bodden is healthy enough and gets his number called by Andre Coles. Um, Even though Iowa's form has been rough, especially in road games, they've been slightly better at home with an average, I believe, of 33 or 34 points in their home games so far. Um, but yeah, this is just a battle between both teams looking for a win to kind of help build momentum going into 2027. So my pick here is going to side with the Gunslingers at that minus 10.5 number. Again, neither of these teams have been really any good against the spread this season. But one of the things that helped guide me to this pick is a little bit of the interesting nature of San Antonio's season, especially defensively. Um, if you look at their games, their selection of games against teams that are in the bottom half of the league in terms of point scoring per game, you'll see a healthy sample of results where San Antonio gave up just 14 points, 17 points. And you look at the opponents that they've had in that stretch, you know, the Tucson's before Jerome Johnson, Northern Arizona's before Anthony Garrett. Um, they've proven that they can really put the locks down on offenses that just have not been at the level that we've typically seen an average IFL offense at. So I feel like the 31 points that I'm predicting Iowa to have here is fairly generous. Um, this could also be a game where San Antonio, again, completely shuts the doors and maybe allows something in the low 20s, which, if they're able to do that, I think the offense should take the rest of the load from there. Um, but I do see 47 to 31 as my most likely final score between these two teams, and that would be good enough to get San Antonio a defining win to at least send Jonathan Bain out on a high note and on some good terms. So that's the pick that will lead off this week. Heading into the second game of Friday's slate, this is a playoff preview. Tucson and San Diego, the locked-in number 4 and number 1 seeds respectively, will get a chance to do a little bit of a practice/scrimmage session is what this really amounts to. The spread favors San Diego at 8.5 points. The over-under is 87.5. Tucson, if you like them on the money line, they have been the most profitable team on that bet type this season. They are plus 270, whereas San Diego is laying minus 340. I'll tell you what, this game is going to be a lot more interesting to discuss about a week from now, when the game actually matters and when the postseason officially opens. But at least for this game, we should expect to see a lot of the backups/complementary players soak up the snaps and eat up the ultimately meaningless minutes that are going to have to be forced to play on this game. In Tucson's case, I would not expect to see Jerome Johnson get any more than maybe one series if he plays at all. And the same deal goes for Nate Davis on the San Diego side. So we should get some pretty decent playing time from Kyle Kelly on San Diego, as well as Dewan Mathis of the Tucson Sugar Skulls, who did get a little bit of time in the contest last week against Northern Arizona. And I believe he ended up leading a touchdown drive maybe too. But that game got all sorts of wild anyways against Northern Arizona, so read into it however you will. But yeah, this game, I mean, it really amounts to the level of strategy that both teams have. Like, we're not going to see anywhere near the plan of attack in this game that we probably will um, in that postseason matchup on Sunday. So, a lot of very interesting picks to go with here. Um, although, with this pick, I am going to go with the visiting Sugar Skulls on the spread at 8.5. I so very badly want to bite on that plus 270 just for old time's sake. Um, but one of the reasons why I hesitate to do that is because both teams are kind of in the same boat. And if we do wind up getting like backups on both sides of the ball, San Diego is still trotting out a very, very solid running duo of Kelly and Tyrell Green. Not to mention some of their other players that they could get some reps for in this game. Maybe Jalen Sample gets a decent chunk of this game after missing last week's contest against New Mexico. Um, again, we're going to have to see exactly how this plays out. But case in point, a loss does not hurt San Diego. A win does not really help Tucson, aside from saying that they can finish the season at 500. So plus 8.5 does seem correct to me as far as this single game pick goes. So we're going to show a little bit of faith here and see what Tucson can do against what should effectively be San Diego's B team. So I've got the Strike Force winning this one, but I do have Tucson keeping it a one-possession game with 44-40 as my projected final scoreline. Moving into Saturday, we will lead off the evening with the second of the home-and-home series between the Tulsa Oilers and the Quad City Steamwheelers. The Oilers are riding the league's longest winning streak at 8 games. They are favored to extend that to 9. They are favored by 5.5 points on the road. The over-under is 85 in the hook. On the money line, Tulsa's minus 205 and Quad City is plus 170. And if last week's game was any indication, even though one team is making the playoffs and one is not, we're in for a treat here, especially with Quad City having this as their home finale, which ironically enough, for the second year in a row, happens to be against this Tulsa Oiler franchise. Starting off our discussion with the Oilers first, how can you not be impressed with their body of work, especially an offense that has just really gelled together with multiple players performing at all IFL levels? TJ Edwards, comeback player of the year in my book at the quarterback spot. Caleb Ramsey, the running back, the midseason addition. Jerminic Smith, offensive player of the year nominee. TJ Davis, who was an all IFL first team wide receiver last year that joined midway through the season. Not to mention guys that are still on IR like Trip Harrington that could come back and provide even more of a spark to an Oiler offense that has eclipsed 44 points in all 8 of their games along their winning streak. So they've been positively fantastic. Defensively, if they can force the issue, get a few impact plays, it's going to be very, very hard for really anybody to stop this Tulsa team with this incredibly hot stretch they've been on. So despite all that talking up of Tulsa, Quad City, you know what? They proved it. They held their own in a hostile environment last week. Corey Ross is showing no hesitation to let Daquan Neal, the veteran, play this string out. I would expect him to also draw the start for this one, barring any injury setback that I am unaware of. Also could look out for Kevin Rudd at wide receiver. I mean, the door is always open for, potential final game conversation? Is that what winds up happening in the aftermath of this contest? We're going to have to see. But yeah, with the way that they drew themselves back into last week's game, I mean, we saw the power of Quad City's defense with Keyshawn Moore, Chima Dunga. Cameron Harrell had a couple big plays in that game as well. So for Tulsa, you're looking for a win to stay afloat in the home turf discussion. If you're Quad City, you're looking to send your fans out on a very, very good high note to close out the season. So what's my pick looking at here? Guys, I have to ride it. I have to ride the streak. That streak, of course, being 8 consecutive Tulsa Oilers games to make the over. I understand last week's game was as close as it could get. It was an over-under of 84.5 back in Oklahoma, and it barely got there thanks to that field goal by Axel Perez to make it a 44-41 game. If you're looking at that matchup as some sort of historical context, though, it's important to note those 85 points came on just 17 combined possessions between the two teams, whereas the league average for a game typically sees both teams handle the ball at least 10 times for a combined 20. So if both offenses keep their efficiency up, and maybe we get a big play on defense and special teams the other way, no reason to think that we can't get a 9th straight Tulsa Oiler over. And given the fact that I've only capitalized on this streak once, which was one of the very beginning games of this streak with a nail-biter with Iowa traveling to Tulsa and making that over in garbage time. But I do think we do get it here. It might take some more late-game magic, but I have to play this one out and see how it goes. My final score projection, which would barely make this prediction a winner, I do have a close game, but I have Tulsa winning 46-42 to keep firm pressure on that Eastern Conference playoff picture. So we'll go for points, and we'll see if both teams can stay hot here. Next game on the slate, the Northern Arizona Wranglers do battle with the Vegas Nighthawks to close out both teams' regular seasons. The Wranglers at 3-12 this season are underdogs in this game, perhaps unsurprisingly to the reigning champions. 16.5 points they are getting. The over-under is 92.5. On the money line, if you like Northern Arizona for what would be a fairly shocking upset, that's plus 550 for you. And Vegas outright is minus 800. This is another game, just like the previous one on Saturday. One team's going to the playoffs, the other is not. One of the main differences between this game and that game is that Vegas already knows their number 2 seed. They're going to be hosting the Arizona Rattlers a week from Sunday. So this game is very much about continuing to play your best football heading in, while also striking that balance of ideal roster management. The one thing that I would say for this game is that I don't think Jaden DeLaura will play. Maybe he gets the first series and that's it. But I'd have to believe Mike Davis is going to take a very, very cautious approach with this franchise quarterback, given that he's already missed a couple games earlier this summer with what was reportedly turf toe injury. So this should be a Quincy Crittenden-led game. And we'll have to see how much Quentin Randolph plays as well to see if the Nighthawks decide to preserve him fully for next week's opening playoff game. So there's going to be a lot of decisions there. I will say, however, that Crittenden has really impressed in his time as the Nighthawks backup. He led a 43-point effort against San Antonio in that memorable come from behind Hail Mary win, along with a 50-point showing on the road against the New Mexico Chupacabras. So even with relying on some more of those depth players like Deshaun Stoudemire, John Irby, um, to some extent Seneca McKee as well, I wouldn't expect that much of an offensive drop off from Vegas, especially considering that the Wranglers have had their fair share of defensive struggles, which really flared up in a big way in their 70-42 loss against the Tucson Sugar Skulls. Um, Northern Arizona's situation is also fairly interesting because we did see Anthony Garrett get injured in I believe, the second quarter of that Tucson game. Didn't end up returning. So the Reigns then went to Debo Bryant, who had himself a pretty nice outing on an individual level, but you could also make the case how hard was Tucson really pressing on defense when they already had anywhere between a 30 and a 40-point lead. So the test should be much more difficult against this Vegas defense, especially in Lee's Family Forum. So we'll have to see how this game pans out. My prediction is going to side with the under at 92.5. For Vegas, this is a very much get in and get out type of game. There's really no need to risk any of your significant starters in this game against Northern Arizona. Really, the only argument that I could have against this is if we get a situation like we had with the Rattlers last week where they clearly were insistent on the idea of logging a statement win, maybe one even directed towards the Vegas Nighthawks in terms of their preparation leading up to this one. But I think cooler heads are going to prevail in this one. Northern Arizona's, we have seen their offense struggle fairly badly on the road in some of their games. Last week's example against Tucson being a fairly solid example in terms of what they went through in the first half of that game. But I don't know. This number seems like a lot for a game that really doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. So given some of those trends that we've talked about a little bit before, we're going to go with the under and see how that pans out. But I have a 51-32 Vegas Nighthawk victory, where it would surprise me if this game ended up flirting with that low 90s mark. All right. 4 games down, 2 more to go. This one to lead off Sunday afternoon probably means the most. It is the Orlando Pirates and the Fishers Freight in what is essentially a play-in tournament style of game. Fishers, who have never actually defeated Orlando in their franchise's history, are favored to do so on Sunday. They are favored by 4.5 points, with the over-under the largest of the week at 97.5. On the money line, Orlando's plus 164, Fishers minus 198. Make no mistake about it, these two are probably not like prime championship contenders that pop up in mind when you're first thinking about that. You're looking at, Vegas, Green Bay, San Diego, teams of that nature. But I would not want to face either of these two teams in the playoffs if you're Green Bay or possibly Tulsa or Jacksonville. Mainly because these teams have identically strong offenses. Even though they've charted fairly polar opposite paths to get there, they're both averaging 48.9 per game. In the case of Paxton DeLaurent in the Orlando Pirates, they've employed more of a passing-oriented style of attack, although Puka Williams, another outstanding overall season at running back for the Navy and Teal. For the Fishers Freight, their reliance on an absolutely bruising running game, throwing basically 3 or 4 different runners at you throughout the balance of most of their contests, with Dominic Roberto and Josiah King at running back, Felix Harper as the dual threat at quarterback, along with any sort of wide receiver jet sweeps that they tend to sprinkle around too, with guys like C.J. Wyndham and Jordan Davis. Not to mention former Pirate Isaiah Coulter. So, no doubt the offensive firepower is going to be there, but there's also a chance for some defensive impact players as well. Jaden Rowe for the Freight, among the league leader in interceptions. Devontae O'Malley, one of the most impactful defensive linemen in the league since joining Orlando after their stint in New Jersey for the American Dream Showcase. So there's going to be an entertainment factor in this game that could lead to a potential steal of a Game of the Year candidate. So a lot of tantalizing options here, but what exactly is my play? And those who know me who have had the chance to know me for the past 5-6 years know that I do have a soft spot for this Pirates team. I mean, they played their first 7 seasons in Massachusetts. I had the season tickets to 4 of their final 4 seasons up here in the Bay State. But I feel like I have to perform my civic duty here and go with the home team. I've got the Freight winning a very, very tight game here. I'm going the money line for my Mortal Mega. It is just a whisker beneath our minus 200 odds requirement for our plays of the week, so makes every sense in the world to capitalize on that condition with this game. There's really a first time for everything, and Orlando, while they have been much better on the road this year compared to prior seasons, to put it frankly for Fishers, this at this point is their franchise's championship game. You hate to really use that moniker, especially given some of the more mocking or condescending tones that expression has, but make no mistake, this crowd is going to be raucous. This is an extremely tough place to play if you're a visiting team. Very few, especially this season, have actually gone in and plucked victory from just outside Indianapolis. And I do see a small advantage in special teams for the Fishers Freight, especially Callum Sutherland at home, because how many games has he had where he's booted through multiple deuces at Fishers Event Center? In a pretty even game overall, where you're looking for some sort of kicker to get you over the top, quite literally speaking, that might belong to Fishers. And I will make a very oddly specific bold prediction here, which I really haven't made any this season, but with this 55-53 projected result, I think this game is won on a Callum Sutherland deuce in the last minute of the fourth quarter. A little bit of some shocking food for thought for you there. As we put the wraps on this selection of Fishers outright to begin Sunday's festivities. And we will conclude the evening, as well as the regular season as a whole, with the matchup of the Eastern Conference's top 2 teams, as it currently stands. With Green Bay going into Jacksonville playing the Sharks, having already clinched the number 1 seed. Green Bay is still a 1.5 favorite here on the road. The over-under is 95.5. The money line gives Green Bay at minus 115 and Jacksonville minus 105. So both teams, you are laying a little bit of money there. But if you do like the Sharks outright, you're laying a nickel. If you want to buy the point, it's only an additional nickel and you're laying a dime. So a little bit of the nuanced ideas of sports predicting out there for you, but um, another game that's going to be very, very interesting with both teams having some pretty different objectives in terms of how they want to deal with this game. Green Bay, like we said, they don't gain anything more than what they already have with another victory in this game, although 14-2 might be their best regular season record ever, so they could hunt that down as well if that's the case. But if you're Jacksonville, your approach to this game is going to depend on the result of the Quad City Tulsa game. If the Oilers win, you must win to ensure that your matchup with them takes place at VyStar Veterans Memorial Arena rather than on the road at Bach Center. So there's going to be some very, very interesting situations to play out here. I'm expecting the majority of the snaps at quarterback for Green Bay to go to Cole Stenstrom, with Liam Thompson maybe getting a series or two, maybe the first quarter. But I don't think Green Bay will want to put any further risk of potential injury on their starting quarterback and likely frontrunner for IFL's MVP award. We'll have to see what they do with the rest of their skill position players as well, included but not limited to Kyrie Robinson, DeMylan Brown, Drayshawn Hudson, Trayvon Alexander, amongst others. We could see some possible logic applying as well to the defensive side, although I'd still expect to see some of those impact players out there. Whereas for Jacksonville, I think the approach here, you still got to win the game in order to be the number 2 seed. I'm not sure if I think if Tulsa loses and Orlando loses, Jacksonville could drop this game and not suffer any seeding consequences. But yeah, it's going to be a game where we can see if Sammy Edwards for Jacksonville can keep up Jacksonville's strong offensive form. They have scored at least 42 points in each of his prior starts since James Cahoon left the team. And this is a nice opportunity, too, for a Sharks defense, which did bounce back nicely last week, albeit against Iowa, to see if they can keep rediscovering that magic against whichever lineup that Green Bay throws out there. So my pick for this game is going to be a second straight home team to get the job done and win outright on Sunday. I'm going with the underdog here. I would love for this to be even money, but no luck here, such is life. But again, with Green Bay prioritizing what their position is going to look like heading into the playoffs, which is predicated on keeping as many of their starters fully healthy and as well rested as possible, leading up to whoever their playoff opponent shakes out to be on next Sunday afternoon. Win-loss record is really not going to be the main factor here driving Green Bay for this game. It will be for Jacksonville, and I believe that's what makes the difference in what should be a pretty thrilling game between two teams that could be on a crash course later on in August postseason. So this final score, I've got 48-42 with Jacksonville taking the victory. And to wrap things up for the evening, I will discuss here my 3-leg parlay quickly. It comes out to plus 442 odds. So again, not earth-shattering, but I do feel like there is some merit to it. Starting off with an underpick in the Tucson-San Diego game, where I just believe that both teams are going to try to exhaust that 60 minutes of game clock as quickly as physically possible. I'd expect to see the run games play a very, very prominent role here. Could get some occasional over-the-top passes, although with potentially two mainly running-oriented quarterbacks at the helm. Um, I don't see that happening too often here, and I don't see either defense getting fooled too much by it to where you'd have to worry about that big play putting any threat to that. Um, Another little interesting nugget that I found is that regular season finales, like the final week of each of the past 3 regular seasons, have actually resulted in a 15-7 under record. So we do lean upon that a little bit to kick this game off. And given that this is mainly a game for formality rather than for really any sort of a statement, I do like the idea of it here as the play to kick off this attempt. Moving to the second leg, which serves as this one's anchor, I've got to go with the Oilers straight up here. It's a -205 money line pick, but fading the Oilers is a fool's errand at this point in time. Um, Obviously, Quad City was flirting with the win last week, which does pose some risk to this pick, although, let's be honest, which pick does not have its fair share of risk? So, again, we like to ride streaks here. Tulsa's won 8 in a row. We'll see if this pick, backing them to get to 9 straight wins, winds up keeping this thing alive. And that takes us to perhaps our boldest leg of the entire season, Orlando and Fishers over 97.5. This game almost has to script out into a shootout, in my mind. We could certainly get tempoed out of this, like if there's only like 9 or 10 possessions apiece for both teams. But I feel like there are going to be some splashes here. Both teams are going to try to want to outdo the other because, really, whichever team is on the wrong side here is going to go home, despite a winning record overall in the season. That's just how razor thin that the margin of error is in what was a hyper-competitive Eastern Conference this season. Both teams average well into the 90s in terms of combined points per game. Orlando, one of the better teams to the overall season with an 11-4 over record. Fishers, I believe, was 9-6 when we looked at our summary table earlier tonight. So let's have some fun. Let's get nuts. Let's go for it. Last matchup between these two teams got to 117 with Orlando's 60-57 win. Let's go points, points, points to wrap the attempt up. So again, those 3 in tandem come out to plus 442 in terms of the odds, which means $10, if successful, would translate into $54.22. So with that, that is going to wrap it up for the 20th and final week of previews of the 2026 regular season. So I want to thank you all again for jumping in and maybe learning a little bit about this great game, this amazing league. If you do decide to play and try your luck, I wish you the very best. And as always, I will see you at the cashier. Have a great finale weekend, everyone.